Caching is fast, like really fast. Today I will show you how to use Redis, the perfect way to make your apps super quick. We will use Redis to store our data and provide it to our user almost instantaneous. I'm going to use fastapi, but this video applies to any backend of your favor. Now let's jump into the workflow. Step 1 is to check the cache. If data is found here, boom, you're done. This is what we call a cache hit. It's super fast because we access the data from the memory. If the data isn't there, step 2 jumps in. So we're gonna have a cache miss, and if the cache misses, we have to query the database. The database is reliable, but slower compared to the cache. Once the data is retrieved from the database, we're gonna write it into the cache so we can use it in further requests and read it on the next request from the cache again. There are multiple ways to host your Redis instance. One is to use a Redis provider like upstash, or you can use a Docker container and Docker Compose to host your Redis instance. In this example, we are going to use upstash to host our Redis cache. For that, you are signing up on upstash and you are going to create a Redis instance. You need to define the name, your region, use the most close to you, and you can enable data eviction, so you're going to delete data if you're going to exceed the limit. On the details page, you're going to find the endpoint and the password which you're going to need to pass into the Python client. You can also find the data browser which we are going to use to read what we write into the Redis instance. Now it's time to get to the code. At first, we are going to define our Redis password as an environmental variable. You can get it from the details page, like I showed you. And we're going to use the endpoint directly in the code, so we don't define that in our variables. We are going to create a default fastapi application. So we initialize the fastapi client at the CORS middleware. We're going to initialize the routers. We are going to use the data router for the showcase of the cache, and we are going to add the data models. For the database, I'm using SQL Alchemy, so I'm importing that one. We're going to define the data table and define the table name. We're going to have an ID as the primary key and an integer. We're gonna have a value that's a string, and it defaults to test data. In the end, we can then use this data to cache it. As the next steps, we're going to define our cache. We're going to add our imports, use OS to read our environment variables. We're going to use Redis as our client, and we're going to add fastapi and typing. Next, we're going to define the function to get the cache, which we'll use as a dependency. We're going to define the cache client with Redis. We're going to use the host from upstash. We're going to use the port. We're going to get the password from our environment variables, and we're going to use SSL true. We're going to return the cache and put it into a dependency. So you're going to use annotated and going to depend on get cache. Now we can get to the actual logic. At first, we're going to import fastapi and going to import a base model from Pydantic and our cache dependency and the DVD dependency. We're also going to import the data model. We're going to define our router. We're going to define the get data request base model, but we're not going to use that. But we're going to use that if it's getting more complex. We're going to add the post data request. And we're going to define our endpoint, and it's going to take the data ID as a string. We're also going to depend on the database, and we also will depend on our cache dependency, which we just defined. Now we can get the cache data from the data ID as a key, and after that we're going to check if the cache has any data, and if the cache has data, we're going to print we got the data from the cache, and we're going to return the data we got from the cache. After that, we're going to check if we don't have any cache data, we're going to check if we have the data in the database. So we're going to get that. And if we don't have any data in the database, we're going to raise an exception. But if we don't have an error, we can use the cache to set the data in the cache by the data ID, and print return from database because we got the data from the database, and we can return that back to the user. Next up, we are going to define a post endpoint, which we're going to use to seed our database with data values and keys. We're going to use the data request to post data request, so we can get the value with the request. We're going to depend on the database. We're going to initialize a new instance of the data. We're going to add the data to the database, and we're going to commit it. And we're going to return added data just for clarity. I've used this endpoint to add some data with the 4 data entries. So we're going to have IDs to 1 to 4. And I added some values to that. By the way, the program I'm using is pgadmin, so you can see what's in your Postgres database. I've now started the fastapi dev server, and we can check out the endpoint we just created with the data ID. We're gonna pass in data ID 1. We're gonna see we get the data returned. We can go into the terminal console and see that we got returned from database. We can go now into the Redis instance on upstash, and we can read a data browser. We can see the ID1 is used as the key and contains the data string in this example. Now, if we go back to the fastapi documentation, we can run this again. We gonna get the same data as before, which was cached, and we can see returned from cache. So we got the basic caching functionality done, and you can surely use this example for more advanced concepts. You can cache a lot of data, you can cache arrays, you can cache objects, and you can make this more complex and certainly implement it in different backend services like Express, fastapi, Django, or whatever you like to use. And you can also integrate the frontend framework and show your data right there. You can also store sessions in cache and whatever your app needs in the end. That was everything from my side. I hope this video helped you and you can use this and implement this in your application, and I will see you in the next video.